$14 billion. That was the number Arif Naqvi told the world he controlled. And for a while, the world believed him. Abraaj Group wasn't a back-alley operation. It was the largest private equity firm focused on emerging markets on the planet. Based in Dubai, it managed money across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. It attracted capital from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Bank's International Finance Corporation, the United States government's development finance arm, and some of the most sophisticated institutional investors alive. These were not naive people. They had research teams, legal departments, due diligence checklists as long as your arm, and they all gave their money to Arif Naqvi. Naqvi built Abraaj from scratch. He founded it in 2002 in Dubai, with an initial focus on the Middle East and North Africa. The pitch was elegant and genuinely compelling. Emerging markets were the future. The developing world needed infrastructure and healthcare and capital, and Western investors were leaving enormous returns on the table by ignoring it. Naqvi was charming, well-connected, and relentlessly ambitious. He spoke at Davos. He cultivated relationships with presidents and prime ministers. He was photographed with world leaders. The Financial Times called him a pioneer. He called himself an impact investor, someone who made money while doing good in the world. It was a beautiful story. The problem was that the story and the books didn't match. The mechanism of what allegedly happened at Abraaj is, at its core, a very old trick dressed in very modern clothes. The firm raised money from investors into specific funds, each with a stated purpose. One of those funds was a healthcare fund launched in 2015, targeting hospitals and medical infrastructure across Pakistan, Nigeria, India, and Kenya. The Gates Foundation committed to it. So did other major institutional backers. The understanding was clear. The money would go into healthcare investments in underserved markets. That was the deal. But according to investigators and subsequent legal proceedings, what actually happened was that money in the healthcare fund was allegedly used for other purposes entirely. When the fund needed to show capital available for investments, cash was allegedly moved in from other parts of the Abraaj structure, a maneuver that would temporarily make the fund's accounts look healthy. Then the money was moved back out. Investigators would later allege this constituted commingling of funds, mixing money that was legally separated, using investor capital for purposes it was never authorized for, and presenting accounts to investors that didn't reflect reality. The Gates Foundation and its co-investors grew suspicious. They hired forensic accountants. Those accountants found a gap of more than $200 million in the healthcare fund that they couldn't reconcile. In January 2018, those investors quietly filed a complaint. That complaint wasn't quiet for long. February 2018, news of the investor complaint leaked to the press. Abraaj released a statement calling the concerns a misunderstanding. Naqvi personally assured investors that everything was fine, that the discrepancies were a technical accounting matter, that Abraaj was cooperating fully. Behind the scenes, the firm was in full crisis. Investors were asking for independent audits. Auditors were asking for documents. Documents were slow to arrive. April 2018, Naqvi stepped aside as chief executive, announcing he would focus on fundraising while the firm sorted out its issues. A restructuring advisor was brought in. More investors began demanding answers. The firm attempted to sell divisions to raise cash. Buyers circled but nothing closed. The money that was supposed to be under management couldn't be fully accounted for in the ways investors required. June 2018, Abraaj filed for provisional liquidation in the Cayman Islands, where several of its funds were domiciled. That filing was the effective death certificate. A $14 billion empire, one of the most celebrated private equity stories in the developing world was over. Liquidators moved in. Staff were let go. The offices in Dubai, New York, London, and across the network went dark. Naqvi himself left the United Arab Emirates. In April 2019, he was arrested at Heathrow Airport in London on a U.S. extradition warrant. The charges were serious: wire fraud, securities fraud, and racketeering, 16 counts in total in the United States indictment. The allegation wasn't merely that Abraaj had accounting problems. The allegation was that Naqvi had orchestrated the deliberate misappropriation of investor funds, allegedly using money meant for healthcare in developing nations to meet obligations elsewhere, to support a lifestyle, and to sustain the appearance of a firm in better financial health than it actually was. In the United Kingdom, Naqvi fought extradition. That legal battle stretched on for years. In 2022, the Dubai Financial Services Authority issued a final notice against him, a fine of $135.6 million, a record for that regulator, and a permanent ban from the financial industry. The DFSA findings described serious failings involving the misuse of fund assets. Others didn't fight. Mustafa Abdulwadud, a former managing partner of Abraaj, pleaded guilty in New York federal court to wire fraud and conspiracy. He agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. His cooperation meant that the case against Naqvi, should extradition ultimately succeed, would rest on testimony from someone who was inside the room. For the investors, the arithmetic was brutal. The Gates Foundation had committed money to a healthcare fund that was supposed to build hospitals and clinics. Instead, it was drawn into litigation, into forensic accounting, into the long, ugly process of liquidation recovery. The World Bank affiliate wrote down losses. Pension funds in the United States and Europe that had exposure to Abraaj vehicles absorbed losses. The people who were supposed to benefit from those healthcare investments, the patients in Lagos and Karachi and Nairobi, received nothing from funds that were supposed to change their access to medicine. The liquidation process recovered cents on the dollar. It is still ongoing years after the collapse. Creditors filed claims in multiple jurisdictions. Lawyers grew wealthy. Former employees scattered across the industry. Some gave evidence. Some went quiet. The brand that Naqvi spent 16 years building, the name that opened doors at Davos and the World Economic Forum and the halls of development finance institutions, became a synonym for alleged fraud on a continental scale. The lesson that Abraaj teaches is one of the oldest in financial history, even if the geography and the language of impact investing made it feel new. The lesson is this: the more sophisticated the story around a money vehicle, the harder it's to ask the obvious question. Impact investing in emerging markets is a genuinely important idea. The language of doing good while generating returns is genuinely appealing. And that appeal, that moral weight, can become a kind of armor against scrutiny. Who wants to be the person who questions the fund building hospitals in Nigeria? Who wants to look cynical when someone is offering to make money and do good simultaneously? That discomfort, the fear of seeming uncharitable, is exactly the gap that an alleged fraud can hide inside. The auditors were sophisticated. The investors were sophisticated. But the story was too good, and the scrutiny arrived too late. $14 billion. Most of it gone. And the patients who were supposed to benefit from those healthcare investments are still waiting.